Now let's discuss the issues in conducting the experimental research. All experiments are subject to threat to their validity in ways that may severely detract from their findings. These are expressed in terms of threats to an experiment's internal validity, that is, those things that may affect whether a true measurement has been obtained using the measuring instrument, and threats to external validity, that is, concerning the generalizability of the findings to the intended population. Internal validity: history events that may occur in society between the first and the second measurements which could explain the change in the dependable variable. For example, in carrying out an experiment on workplace morals, something may happen in the experimental group's workplace and not in control group's workplace. Even outside influence such as particular good or bad weather, most definitely outside the control of the experimental, may have impact on the experiment. The next point that needs to be taken care of is the maturation. Other processes that may be influenced by the passage of time between the two tests, the obviously dependent on the time that elapsed between the pre-test and the post-test. Where the gap is a considerable one, a variety of factors including personal life events may need to be taken into account. Third is the mortality. This happens when some of the experimental or control group leave the experiment, thus affecting the two groups' comparability. Again, this will be a function of length of the experiment and will be more of an issue where the experiment takes place over a longer period. Fourth one is the instrumentation. Any variation in the tests, whether between the two groups or over the two tests, it will be very important to ensure that the same instrument is used for both the pre-test and the post-test. If this is not the case, then the observed difference could be the result of variation in a measurement process. Testing, the final point, the possibility that the test itself may explain the change in the dependable variability. For example, in the course of carrying out an experiment on the extent to which exposure to a party election broadcast might affect the level of people's political knowledge, the very act of actually taking part in the experiment itself might affect people's test score. It might get them into the mode of being tested, perhaps by relieving any pre-test nerve and increasing their general pre-test level of confidence. If this is the case, it is possible that any change you record may actually be the result of your conducting the research, not of showing them the party election broadcast. Next is external validity. The main threat to external validity is that the knowledge that people are participating in a study is likely to impact on the behavior of the research participants. If, for example, the people in the study know that you are observing them to see whether their morale has improved after the introduction of a new management initiative, they may deliberately act in a particular way. This is known as the problem of reactivity. They may display marked positive or negative reaction depending on the disposition towards their employer. This phenomenon has become known as the Hawthorne effect. After a research project that was carried out by Hawthorne Works in Chicago in the 1920s, where the workers in question acted up for the benefit of the researcher. Reactivity is used as a methodological justification for using a level of deception in experimental research. Ethical issues in the experimental research. Experimental research raises a number of ethical dilemmas concerning the manner in which researchers treat people. For example, some researchers may consider it inappropriate to manipulate human beings in the same way as laboratory animals such as mice and guinea pigs are treated. An additional ethical consideration in relation to experimental research is the question of including or excluding people from a study in which some may benefit. For example, an experiment may be designed to measure the effect that the introduction of CCTV has in reducing crime in certain residential neighborhoods. In this instance, it may be argued that researchers occupy a too powerful position. in being able to decide which area and therefore which residents will benefit from the experiment and which will not benefit. One way around such a charge of unethical abuse of power by the researcher is to take a chain that is occurring anyway and collect or obtain statistics from before the change, during it and after it. This is known as quasi-experiment. As we have discussed earlier, there are two types of quantitative research: experimental method and survey method. We have already seen the experimental method. Now we are going to discuss the survey method. We have already discussed sample survey in detail in another module on survey method and sampling method. We'll try to understand very briefly here. Sample surveys are conducted in order to provide the researcher or the sponsor of the research with statistical information either on a particular issue or a problem that needs resolving, or to test the robustness or not of an existing theory. This involves measuring various phenomena and drawing conclusion about any relationship between them to establish patterns of cause and effect. For instance, in a study of industrial relations, we might compare different workplaces in terms of a number of variables that we hypothesize are likely to be associated with the industrial descent. These might be the size of the firm or organization, the type of industry, the inclusiveness of the decision-making process, whether the organization is unionized or not, the skill level of the employees, the gender mixing within the organization, the balance between part-time and the full-time employees, the unemployment rate in the local area, and so on. To analyze such relationships and draw widespread conclusion requires the researcher to generate large amount of data so that conclusions can be generalized from the sample survey to the wider population from which the survey respondents were drawn. In order to have confidence in the results generated from a sample survey and to eliminate or minimize bias, the researcher should aim to maximize the response rate, and in doing so ensure that the study is representative of the population group. Sample surveys are a method of gathering information by means of personal interviews or questionnaire. They are sometimes referred as mass interviews because they are a way of collecting similar information from a large number of people at the same time. Sample surveys are based on standardized approaches using standardized instruments such as questionnaire. These research instruments employ fixed question and answer formats so that there is a consistency of data collection approach regardless of who is actually asking the question. The sample survey is therefore akin to a structured dialogue between usually two people in which the researcher asks a series of pre-planned standardized questions and the respondents' answers are recorded precisely on a form and ultimately turned into numbers for statistical analysis. In this way, the studies are said to be quantitative in nature. Let's now understand the uses of the survey research, which is a very important part of the quantitative research. Academic researchers conduct surveys to test out various research hypotheses. For example, they may want to explore the relationship between age and political conservatism, or why is it that some children play truant from school, or under what circumstances people become addicted to gambling. By gathering statistical evidences, survey research may help to support a particular theory by shedding light on the connection and association that exists between such variables. In this way, researchers look for patterns that may explain social phenomena. Academics are not the only people who use survey method as research method. Other users of surveys can be broadly categorized as follows. 1. Government and its agencies, volunteer sectors organization and campaign groups use survey research to inform the influence of the political, economic and social policy making process. Then business of all sizes carry out surveys in their quest for gathering a lead in the market for their product by differentiating their product against those of their competitors. Third, the media and the political parties carry out public opinion polls on voting intentions, partly political leaders and their policies. Survey research can be used to obtain multifaceted data from an individual on the behavior, straightforward questions on what the respondent has done or is doing or may be doing in the future. For example, it is possible to ask people if they use public transport for certain journeys or if they are vegetarian. Then there are questions on belief, like what people think will happen. What do they believe is true or false? Do people believe that the National Health Service is safer in the hands of the current government than it was under the previous administration? Then there are questions on attitudes, how people think and feel about certain things. For example, whether people consider that women with preschool children should participate in the workforce. Questions on attributes. These are the personal questions that concern the characteristics of the respondent, such as his or her age, sex, ethnicity, religion, and employment status. As such, these questions have the potential to be viewed as a sensitive question. They are often referred to as classification questions. By employing a combination of such questions in a survey, the skillful researchers open up the possibility of describing and explaining complex social phenomena.